Greenhaven was the kind of town where everyone knew your name, where kids played on tree-lined streets, and neighbors swapped casseroles over backyard fences. Nestled in the rolling hills of Oregon, it seemed like the perfect escape from the chaos of the outside world. But appearances can be deceiving. Beneath the surface of its picturesque calm, trouble was brewing. Emma Carter parked her well-worn pickup truck in front of her father's small house on Maple Street. It was the same home she'd grown up in, but it felt different now. Her military career as a Navy pilot had taken her far from Greenhaven, but after her mother's passing and her father's accident, she knew it was time to come back. "Emma, is that you?" Her father, Thomas Carter, called from the living room. His voice was warm but strained, a reminder of the injuries that had left him reliant on a cane. "It's me, Dad," Emma replied, stepping inside. She found him seated by the window, a steaming cup of coffee on the table beside him. His once strong frame looked smaller now, but his spirit remained unbroken. "You didn't have to come all the way back, you know," Thomas said, though his smile betrayed how much he appreciated her presence. "Someone has to keep an eye on you," Emma teased, leaning down to give him a hug. "Besides, I missed this town." As much as she tried to focus on the good, Emma couldn't ignore the changes in Greenhaven. The friendly chatter in the diner seemed quieter. People walked faster, their eyes darting nervously to the shadows. Rumors of the Iron Fangs, a biker gang that had been steadily tightening its grip on the town, were impossible to ignore. Later that evening, Emma decided to visit Marcy Bennett, the owner of the town's beloved diner. The two had been close during Emma's teenage years, and Marcy's diner was practically a second home. But when Emma stepped inside, she felt an unfamiliar tension. Marcy was behind the counter, her hands trembling as she poured coffee for a lone customer. "Emma!" she exclaimed, her face lighting up. But the joy quickly faded, replaced by worry. "It's so good to see you, but things aren't like they used to be. What's going on?" Emma asked, sliding onto a stool. "I've been hearing about some trouble." Marcy leaned in, her voice low. "It's the Iron Fangs. They're demanding protection money from all the businesses in town. They call it security, but everyone knows what it really is. If we don't pay, they threaten us." As if on cue, the door swung open and 3 men in leather jackets walked in. Their leader, a burly man with a scar running down his cheek, swaggered to the counter. "Evening, Marcy," he drawled. "Hope you've got our payment ready." Emma turned to face him, her eyes narrowing. "What's this about?" The man glanced at her, smirking. "Who's asking?" "Emma Carter," she said, her voice steady. "And I don't think you're welcome here." The man's smirk faltered for a moment, but he recovered quickly. "Look, lady, we're just here to keep things running smoothly. No need for a hero." "Is that what you call it?" Emma shot back. "Threatening people who can't fight back?" The man's hand hovered over his belt, where a knife was visible. "You've got a big mouth. Maybe you should mind your own business." Emma's military instincts kicked in. She rose from her stool slowly, her stance deliberate. "Leave. Now." For a moment, it seemed like the situation would escalate. But something in Emma's unwavering gaze gave the man pause. He muttered something under his breath and motioned for his men to follow him out. Marcy let out a shaky breath. "Emma, you don't know what you've just done." "I know exactly what I've done," Emma said. "And I'm not going to stand by while these bullies terrorize this town." But as she left the diner that night, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that she just stepped into a much larger battle, one that would test her courage and her faith in everything she believed in. Victor Grizz Harmon leaned back in his chair, the creak of the old wood barely audible over the hum of the Iron Fangs clubhouse. The building, an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Greenhaven, had been transformed into their fortress. To the townspeople, it was a symbol of fear. To Victor, it was his kingdom. A kingdom he had built brick by brick after being discarded by a world that no longer cared. He rubbed the scar on his cheek absent-mindedly, a souvenir from his time in the Marines. Back then, he had fought for a country that he believed in, for ideals that seemed worth dying for. But after his return, the support he had expected never came. He had been just another name on a long list of forgotten veterans. Anger and resentment had consumed him, And when a few other disenfranchised vets gravitated toward him, the Iron Fangs were born. Victor lit a cigarette, the tip glowing in the dim light. Around him, his men lounged, playing cards and swapping stories. They were a rough bunch, some veterans like him, others misfits who had never fit into society. They weren't saints, but to Victor, they were family. Grizz, a voice called from the corner. It was Cal, one of his lieutenants. Got news from town. That woman at the diner? She's causing trouble? Victor raised an eyebrow. What kind of trouble? Cal shrugged. She stood up to us. Told Rick and the boys to leave. Victor exhaled a cloud of smoke, his expression unreadable. A newcomer? Nope, Cal replied. Emma Carter. Local girl. Used to be in the Navy or something. Victor leaned forward, his interest piqued. Carter. I remember that name. Her old man's the firefighter, right? The one who got hurt. That's the one, Cal confirmed. Victor let out a dry laugh. A hero's daughter, trying to play savior. Let's see how far that gets her. The next day, Green Haven awoke to find the Iron Fang's presence more palpable than ever. Their bikes roared through Main Street, an unmistakable reminder of who was in charge. Businesses that had hesitated to pay the gang their security fee found shattered windows or spray-painted warnings on their doors. The message was clear. Resistance would not be tolerated. Emma saw the damage as she drove through town. The grocery store's front window was a spiderweb of cracks, and the hardware store had "Pay Up" scrawled in red across its facade. Her stomach churned with anger. She parked in front of the hardware store, where she found Jake Murphy, the owner, sweeping up shards of glass. He looked up as she approached, his face a mix of frustration and resignation. Jake, Emma said, her voice firm, what happened? What do you think? Jake replied bitterly. They're sending a message. Did you call the sheriff? She asked. Jake laughed humorlessly. Sheriff's already stretched thin. And even if he wasn't, what's he gonna do? Those guys outnumber his deputies 3-1. Emma clenched her fists. This isn't right. We can't let them keep doing this. Jake sighed, leaning on his broom. You've got guts, Emma, but guts won't stop them. They're too organized, too dangerous. That's what they want you to believe, Emma said. But I know how bullies work. They only have power if we give it to them. Jake shook his head, skeptical. I hope you know what you're doing. Meanwhile, Victor was meeting with his inner circle. His lieutenants, Cal, Brick, and Reese, sat around the table, each waiting for their leader's direction. This Carter woman, Victor began, his voice low but commanding. She's poking the bear. If we let her get away with it, others might start thinking they can do the same. Brick, a heavy-set man with a bald head and a perpetual scowl, cracked his knuckles. Want me to scare her off? Victor shook his head. Not yet. She's new to this fight, which means she's probably overconfident. Let her make the first mistake. When she does, we'll remind the town who's in charge. Reese, the youngest of the group, shifted uncomfortably. What if she doesn't back down? Victor's gaze hardened. Then we make an example of her. That evening, Emma called a meeting at Marcy's diner. A handful of residents showed up. Marcy, Jake, Olivia, the high school teacher, and a few others. The atmosphere was tense, but there was a flicker of hope in their eyes. We can't keep living like this, Emma began, standing at the head of the room. The Iron Fangs think they own this town, but they only have as much power as we give them. Jake scoffed. Easier said than done. They've got numbers, weapons, and fear on their side. That's true, Emma admitted. But we have something they don't. We have each other. If we stand together, we can push back. Olivia, usually soft-spoken, raised her hand. How? They're not going to just walk away because we ask them nicely. Emma nodded. We need to be smart about this. We need to document everything they do, every threat, every act of vandalism, and take it to the authorities. But more than that, we need to show them we're not afraid. And what happens when they come after us? Jake asked. Emma met his gaze. Then we remind them that Green Haven isn't just a town. It's a community. And communities protect their own. As the meeting broke up, Emma lingered at the diner, staring out the window at the dark street beyond. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The Iron Fangs weren't just a gang. They were a symptom of deeper issues, of broken systems and forgotten people. But she also knew that justice wasn't about taking the easy road. Victor was out there, watching, waiting for her to make a move. And when he did, she would be ready. The morning sun rose over Green Haven, but it did little to lift the heavy mood that had settled over the town. Fear had a way of seeping into every corner, and with the Iron Fang's recent acts of intimidation, many residents felt the weight of their presence more than ever. Emma Carter parked her truck in the town square, stepping out with a clipboard in hand. She had spent the morning visiting local businesses, speaking to owners about standing together against the gang. Some listened with cautious optimism, but many were hesitant. She approached the hardware store, where Jake Murphy was repairing his shop window with a piece of plywood. He glanced up as Emma approached. "Back again, huh?" he said, brushing sawdust from his hands. "Let me guess, you're here to rally the troops?" Emma smiled faintly. "Something like that. How's it going?" Jake shrugged. "Could be worse, but I'm not sure this is worth the fight, Emma. People are scared. The Fangs don't just make threats, they follow through. That's exactly why we need to stand up to them," Emma said. "If we keep giving in, they'll never stop." Jake hesitated, his eyes darting to the fresh graffiti on the side of his building. A snarling wolf head, the Iron Fang's signature mark. "It's not that simple. Not everyone's as brave as you." That evening, the Green Haven Town Council convened at the community center. The room was packed, a rare occurrence for such meetings. The issue on the table: how to address the growing threat of the Iron Fangs. Mayor Harold Grant, a balding man in his 60s, called the meeting to order. "Thank you all for coming," he said, his voice wavering slightly. "We're here to discuss the recent incidents involving the Iron Fangs and what steps, if any, we can take to address them." Councilwoman Linda Perkins, a stern woman with graying hair, spoke first. "With all due respect, Mr. Mayor, I don't see how we can win this fight. The Fangs are too entrenched. If we push back, they'll retaliate." Emma, seated in the audience, couldn't hold her tongue. "So we're just supposed to let them walk all over us?" Linda frowned. "Miss Carter, I appreciate your passion, but this isn't a military operation. This is a small town, and these people are our neighbors, our friends. We can't afford to escalate things." Emma stood, addressing the room. "I understand your concerns, but letting them continue unchecked isn't the answer. The longer we wait, the stronger they get. We need to show them that Green Haven won't be bullied." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some nodded in agreement, while others exchanged uneasy glances. Meanwhile, in a dimly lit backroom of the Iron Fangs clubhouse, Victor Grizz Harmon was holding a meeting of his own. His lieutenants sat around the table, their faces grim. "They're getting bold," Victor said, pacing the room. "This Carter woman's stirring the pot, and the town's starting to think they can stand up to us." Brick, his most loyal enforcer, leaned back in his chair. "Want us to send another message? We could make an example of someone." Victor stopped pacing, his eyes narrowing. "Not yet. If we hit them too hard now, we'll push them to call in outside help. That's the last thing we need. Let them divide themselves first." Reese, the youngest of the group, looked uneasy. "What if they actually pull together? Carter's got military training. She's not like the others." Victor smirked. "Then we remind them why they fear us." The next day, Emma called another meeting, this time at the high school gymnasium. She had spent hours going door to door, urging residents to attend. Dozens showed up, their faces a mix of fear and hope. "Thank you for coming," Emma began, standing at the front of the room. "I know things seem bleak right now, but we can't let fear control us. The Iron Fangs are strong, but they're not invincible. If we stand together, we can take back our town." A man in the back raised his hand. "And how do you suggest we do that? They've got weapons, numbers. What do we have?" "We have each other," Emma said. "I've been in worse situations than this, and the only way out is unity. We start small, documenting their crimes, sharing information, and protecting each other. We can do this without violence." Marcy, the diner owner, stood up. "Emma's right. I've lived here my whole life, and I'm not about to let some gang drive me out. We have to fight for our town." Her words sparked a wave of support, but not everyone was convinced. Jake crossed his arms, his expression skeptical. What happens when they come after us? What do we do then? Emma met his gaze. We don't let it get to that point. We stay vigilant, and we show them we're not afraid. Bullies thrive on fear. Take that away, and they lose their power. Later that evening, as Emma walked back to her truck, she found herself deep in thought. The meeting had gone better than she'd expected, but the division among the townspeople was clear. Some were ready to fight, while others were paralyzed by fear. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a message from Olivia, the high school teacher. Be careful. I overheard some of the kids talking. The Fangs know about the meeting, and they're not happy. Emma sighed, looking out at the quiet streets of Green Haven. She knew this fight wouldn't be easy, but she also knew it was one worth having. As she started her truck, she noticed a motorcycle parked a block away, its rider watching her. The faint glow of a cigarette ember gave him away. Emma didn't flinch. Instead, she gave him a long, hard stare before driving off into the night. The battle for Green Haven had only just begun. Emma Carter stood in the gymnasium of Green Haven High School, her military training kicking into high gear as she addressed a group of determined townspeople. The turnout was better than she had expected, nearly 40 people, ranging from business owners like Jake to local parents and retirees. Despite the fear etched into their faces, a flicker of hope remained. Here's the plan, Emma said, pointing to a map of Green Haven pinned to the gym wall. We're going to organize this town, street by street. Each block will have a point of contact, someone who can alert the group if the Iron Fangs are spotted. Communication is key. If we work together, we can stay one step ahead. Jake raised his hand, his skepticism barely masked. And what happens when they show up? We're not exactly trained for this. That's why we're not fighting them head-on, Emma replied. We're protecting what's ours, our homes, our businesses, our neighbors. The goal isn't to escalate. It's to resist strategically. At the back of the gym, Olivia, the high school teacher, nodded in agreement. We can also work with the sheriff's department. Even if they're outnumbered, they have legal authority. We need to keep everything above board. Emma continued, we'll set up security measures, installing cameras, reinforcing doors and windows, and organizing patrols. This isn't about confrontation. It's about showing them we're not easy targets. Meanwhile, on the outskirts of town, Victor Harmon stood on the front steps of the Iron Fangs clubhouse, surveying his men as they loaded their bikes with supplies. The Fangs were restless, their frustration growing as Green Haven began to resist. Brick approached Victor, his expression grim. Word is, Carter's rallying the town. People are starting to push back. Victor's jaw tightened. Let them. A little pushback won't last long once we remind them who's in charge. Brick hesitated. Some of the guys are getting nervous. They're saying Carter's not like the others. She's strategic. Victor's lips curled into a smirk. Good. I like a challenge. Inside, Reese leaned against the wall, watching the exchange with unease. He had joined the Iron Fangs out of desperation, hoping to find a sense of belonging after leaving the service. But the gang's methods were starting to wear on him, especially now that their targets included innocent families. The first test of Emma's strategy came 2 nights later. The Iron Fangs rolled into Green Haven under the cover of darkness, their motorcycles' roars muffled by the winding back roads. They targeted the diner, their tires crunching on the gravel parking lot as they approached. Inside, Marcy was closing up for the night when she heard the noise. Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone, dialing Emma's number. They're here, Marcy whispered, her voice shaking. Stay inside, Emma replied, already grabbing her jacket. Help's on the way. Emma had prepared for this. She had assigned Jake and a few others to patrol the area around the diner, equipped with radios and flashlights. By the time she arrived, they were already in position, stationed across the street to observe and report. As the gang members approached the diner, they found themselves illuminated by floodlights. Jake's voice rang out from a nearby rooftop. Leave now, or we're calling the sheriff. The Iron Fangs hesitated. They had expected an easy target, not a coordinated response. After a tense standoff, Victor's men retreated, their engines roaring as they sped away. The next morning, the town buzzed with the news of the diner's defense. It was a small victory, but it sent a clear message. Green Haven wasn't going to roll over. Emma gathered her group at the community center, praising their efforts while preparing them for the next steps. "This was just the beginning," she said. "They'll come back, and we need to be ready." Olivia spoke up, her voice steady. "I've been working with the students to create flyers and signs. We can spread the word about what's happening and encourage more people to join us." Jake added, "I've got some old security cameras at the shop. They're not fancy, but they'll do the job." The group's resolve was growing, but Emma knew they couldn't do it alone. She made a call to Major Luke Sanders, an old military contact who ran a veterans support group in the neighboring town. When she explained the situation, Luke agreed to help. "You've got my people," he said. "We've been where these guys are. We'll train your team and show them how to hold their ground without escalating." Luke and his team arrived that weekend, bringing with them a wealth of experience and a sense of calm authority. The veterans led workshops on nonviolent resistance, situational awareness, and basic self-defense. They taught the townspeople how to de-escalate confrontations and recognize potential threats. For the first time in weeks, Green Haven felt a glimmer of hope. But not everyone was on board. At a town meeting, tensions flared as some residents expressed doubts about Emma's approach. "Standing up to them is just going to make things worse," argued Richard Palmer, the owner of the local bank. "We should just pay them off and be done with it." Emma stood firm. "Paying them only makes the problem worse. It tells them we're weak. Is that the message you want to send?" The room was divided. Some nodded in agreement, while others murmured their uncertainty. Victor, watching from a distance, saw the cracks forming in Green Haven's defenses. "Let them fight among themselves," he told Brick. "The more divided they are, the easier they'll be to control." That night, as Emma walked through the quiet streets of Green Haven, she felt the weight of the town's struggle pressing down on her. But she also felt the determination of those who stood beside her. The Iron Fangs had underestimated Green Haven. They saw a quiet town and assumed it would be an easy conquest. But Emma knew better. Quiet didn't mean weak. And together, they were going to prove it. The air in Green Haven was heavy with tension, but also with a sense of growing unity. Emma Carter stood in front of the community center's bulletin board, pinning up a map of the town marked with patrol zones. The organized defense was gaining momentum, but Emma knew the Iron Fangs weren't just a physical threat. They were an emotional and psychological one, preying on the town's fears and divisions. It was time for a different strategy. Victor Grizz Harmon sat in the shadowy confines of the Iron Fangs clubhouse, his face illuminated by the glow of a flickering neon sign. He leaned forward, studying a set of photos Brick had laid out on the table. Images of Emma, the town's patrols, and the newly fortified diner. His jaw tightened. "They're getting bold," Brick said, lighting a cigarette. "This Carter woman's got them thinking they can win." Victor didn't respond immediately. He flipped through the photos, his mind churning. He had spent years building the Iron Fangs into more than a gang. To him, they were a haven for lost souls, a brotherhood of misfits and forgotten veterans. He understood their pain because he lived it every day. But now, he was beginning to sense cracks forming within his own group. Reese, seated in the corner, finally spoke. "What if she's right?" All eyes turned to him, and Brick's scowl deepened. "What the hell are you talking about?" Reese hesitated, then met Victor's gaze. "I'm just saying, maybe there's another way. This isn't what I signed up for." Victor's expression darkened. "You signed up to survive, Reese. That's what we're doing here, surviving. Don't forget that." Reese said nothing, but his unease was palpable. Emma knew she needed to understand the Iron Fangs on a deeper level if she wanted to break their grip on Green Haven. She reached out to Luke Sanders, her military contact, and explained her plan. "Do you know any of them?" Emma asked. "I mean, personally?" Luke thought for a moment. "Victor Harmon. We served in the same unit briefly. He was solid back then, a good leader. But the system failed him, like it failed a lot of us." Emma leaned forward. "Can you reach him?" Luke shook his head. "Victor's stubborn, and he's carrying a lot of anger. But I can tell you this, he's not evil. He's just lost. If anyone can pull him out of this, it might be you." Encouraged by Luke's insight, Emma began digging into Victor's past. She discovered that, like many of his men, He was a veteran who had struggled to reintegrate into civilian life. Medical bills, PTSD, and unemployment had driven him to the fringes of society. The Iron Fangs weren't just a gang. They were a symptom of a larger problem. Emma decided to take a risk. She sent a message through one of Victor's men, Sean, who had quietly approached her during one of the town's patrols. Sean was younger than most of the Fangs and clearly conflicted about his role in the gang. "Tell Victor the first one to meet," Emma said. "No weapons, no tricks, just a conversation." Sean hesitated. "He's not the kind of guy who just sits down to talk." "Maybe not," Emma replied, "but I have to try." Sean delivered the message, and to Emma's surprise, Victor agreed. They met at an abandoned barn on the outskirts of town, a neutral location chosen by Victor. Victor arrived on his bike, flanked by Brick and Reese. Emma stood alone, her hands visible to show she wasn't armed. "So," Victor said, dismounting, "you're the one stirring up my town." "It's not your town," Emma replied calmly. "It belongs to the people who live there." Victor smirked. "And I suppose you think you're some kind of savior." "I'm just someone who believes things can be different," Emma said. "You don't have to keep doing this, Victor. You and your men, there's a way out." Victor's expression hardened. "You think you know me? You think you understand what it's like to be tossed aside like garbage after you've given everything?" "I do," Emma said. "I've seen it. I've lived it. But this, extortion, threats, fear, it's not the answer. It's just more pain." For a moment, Victor's mask slipped. Emma saw the man beneath the bravado, a man who was tired, angry, and searching for meaning. But the moment passed quickly. "This is who we are now," Victor said. "There's no going back." "That's where you're wrong," Emma said. "You can choose to be something else. You don't have to do it alone. There's a veterans support group in town, led by Luke Sanders. He told me about you, about the leader you used to be." Victor's jaw tightened, and Brick stepped forward. "Enough of this," he growled. "We don't need her preaching." But Reese held him back. "Let her talk." Victor turned and mounted his bike. "You've got guts, Carter. I'll give you that. But guts won't save your town." As Victor and his men rode away, Emma felt a flicker of hope. Reese's reaction told her that not everyone in the Iron Fangs was beyond reach. Back in Greenhaven, Emma gathered her allies at the community center to outline her next steps. "We need to show them there's another way," Emma said. "We're not just fighting a gang. We're trying to heal a wound." "How do we do that?" Marcy asked. Emma held up a flyer for a new program they designed with Luke's help, the Green Haven Veterans Initiative. It offered job training, counseling, and community service opportunities for anyone in the gang willing to leave it behind. "They won't all come willingly," Jake said. "They don't have to," Emma replied. "All we need is for a few of them to see it's possible. The rest will follow." That night, Victor sat alone in the clubhouse, replaying Emma's words in his mind. He didn't want to admit it, but she had struck a nerve. Reese approached cautiously. "She's right, you know," Reese said. "This doesn't have to be who we are." Victor stared at him, his voice low. "Careful, Reese. You're walking a fine line." "Maybe it's time we did," Reese said. "Because it's not survival. It's just running in circles." As Reese walked away, Victor felt the weight of his choices pressing down on him. For the first time in years, he wondered if there might be a way out, a way to lead his men towards something better. But the question remained, could he take that step, or was it already too late? The tension in Greenhaven was palpable as the Iron Fangs began to fracture under the weight of Emma's initiative. The Greenhaven Veterans Initiative had sparked whispers among the gang, creating cracks in Victor's iron grip. Some of his men started to see the possibilities beyond their life of crime, while others clung to their loyalty like a shield. But Victor Grizz Harmon wasn't ready to relinquish his hold. Emma stood in the community center, her voice calm but firm as she addressed a group of townspeople. The room was packed with residents who had finally begun to believe in the possibility of change. Marcy, Olivia, Jake, and even a few of Victor's former followers were present, their faces a mix of hope and determination. "Tonight, we take another step forward," Emma said, pointing to a chalkboard that outlined their strategy. "The Iron Fangs are losing their grip. We've seen it in the ones who've left, in the ones who've hesitated. but that makes them more dangerous. A cornered animal fights harder. Jake raised his hand. What happens if Victor decides to go all in? If he pushes back harder than ever? Emma's gaze didn't waver. That's why we're prepared. We've reinforced key locations, we've got patrols, and most importantly, we've shown them they can't scare us anymore. Luke Sanders, the veteran leader who had been mentoring the town, stepped forward. We've also offered them an out. Programs like the one we've started here don't just provide hope, they provide options. If we keep showing them what's possible, we'll win more of them over. But what if they don't take it? Olivia asked. Emma hesitated, then said, then we keep standing. For ourselves, for our town, and for those who can still be saved. At the Iron Fangs clubhouse, Victor gathered his men for what he called a family meeting. The room was tense, the usual camaraderie replaced by suspicion. Reese stood near the back, watching with a mix of guilt and defiance. Victor slammed his fist on the table, silencing the murmurs. We're at a crossroads, he said, his voice low and menacing. Greenhaven thinks they can win. They think they can break us with their little program. Brick grunted in agreement. Let's show them they're wrong. Hit them where it hurts. Victor nodded. We send a message. One they'll never forget. Reese, unable to stay silent, stepped forward. And then what? We destroy the town? Keep running until there's nothing left? Victor's eyes narrowed. Careful, Reese. You sound like one of them. Maybe I should, Reese shot back. Because this isn't survival anymore. It's just desperation. The room fell silent as Victor stared him down. If you're not with us, you're against us. Reese held his ground. Then maybe it's time I chose a different side. Before Victor could respond, Reese turned and walked out, leaving the clubhouse and the gang behind. Reese arrived at the community center later that evening, his expression grim. Emma, Luke, and the others listened as he explained Victor's plan. He's going to hit you hard, Reese said. Probably tonight. He's done waiting. Emma frowned, already running scenarios in her mind. What's his target? The diner, Reese said. It's a symbol to him, of everything you've built. If he takes it down, he thinks he'll break you. Luke nodded. We've reinforced the diner, but we'll need more people to hold it. Emma stood. We're not letting him destroy what we've built. Reese hesitated. I want to help. I know I don't deserve your trust, but I'm done with Victor. I'm done with all of it. Emma looked at him, her expression softening. If you're willing to fight for this town, then you're one of us now. That night, the Iron Fangs made their move. Victor led a convoy of motorcycles down Main Street, their engines roaring like thunder. But instead of fear, the streets were filled with resistance. As they approached the diner, floodlights illuminated the area. Emma, Luke, and their group were ready, positioned strategically around the building. The townspeople, armed with cameras, radios, and non-lethal tools, stood firm. Victor dismounted, his scar catching the light as he faced Emma. You think this changes anything? He snarled. You think you can win? Emma stepped forward, her voice steady. We already have. Look around you, Victor. This town isn't afraid of you anymore. Victor's men hesitated, their confidence shaken by the sight of the united front. Reese, standing beside Emma, called out to them. You don't have to do this. You don't have to follow him. There's another way. For a moment, silence hung in the air. Then, one by one, some of Victor's men began lowering their weapons, stepping back from the conflict. No. Victor roared, his anger boiling over. You're either with me or against me. Emma held her ground. This isn't about sides, Victor. It's about choosing to be better. Victor drew a weapon, but before he could act, Luke stepped between him and the crowd. You don't want to do this, Harmon. I know you. You're better than this. Victor faltered, his hand trembling. Years of anger and pain warred with a flicker of doubt. Finally, he lowered the weapon, his shoulders slumping in defeat. It's over, Victor said quietly. I'm done. The next morning, Greenhaven was filled with an air of cautious celebration. The Iron Fangs had disbanded, with many of their members joining the Greenhaven Veterans Initiative. Victor, now under investigation for his crimes, had agreed to testify against the larger network of gangs he had been connected to. Reese stood outside the diner, watching as volunteers repaired the minor damage from the confrontation. Emma approached, offering him a cup of coffee. "Looks like you made your choice," she said. Reese nodded. "Best decision I've made in years." Emma smiled faintly. "You're not the only one." Across the street, Victor sat on the steps of the sheriff's office, waiting for his next steps. He looked tired, but there was a hint of relief in his expression. For the first time in years, he wasn't running. Green Haven had faced its darkest night and emerged stronger. But Emma knew the real work was just beginning. Healing would take time, but now they had the foundation to rebuild. Not just their town, but the lives of those who had once sought to destroy it. The sun rose over Green Haven, casting a golden light over a town transformed. The streets, once heavy with fear, now carried the buzz of rebuilding and renewal. Emma Carter stood outside Marcy's diner, sipping her coffee as she watched volunteers repaint the building's exterior. The snarling wolf graffiti was long gone, replaced by a fresh coat of pale blue that matched the hope blooming in the town. It had been 2 weeks since the Iron Fangs disbanded. Victor, Grizz, Harmon, and several of his former lieutenants were in custody, their cooperation helping law enforcement dismantle a larger network of criminal operations across the region. But the true victory lay in the lives that had begun to change, not just in Green Haven but beyond. Inside the community center, Emma addressed a group of townspeople, volunteers, and former gang members. The atmosphere was tense but optimistic, the lines between past adversaries beginning to blur. "We've taken the first steps," Emma said, her voice strong. "But this isn't just about the Iron Fangs. It's about building something stronger than what we had before. A town where everyone feels safe, supported, and seen." Reese, now a regular at these meetings, stood up to speak. "I want to thank you all," he began, his voice shaky but sincere. "I've done things I'm not proud of, and I know I have a lot to make up for. But for the first time in years, I feel like I have a purpose, and that's because of this town." His words were met with applause, and Emma saw Jake Murphy, the once skeptical hardware store owner, nodding in approval. The small victories were beginning to add up. Emma's phone buzzed with a call from Luke Sanders. She stepped outside to answer, leaning against the community center wall. "Emma," Luke said, "I just got word from the VA. They're interested in making the Green Haven Veterans Initiative a model for other towns." Emma smiled. "That's great news. How soon can we start?" "They want you to speak at their conference next month," Luke said. "Share your story. Show them how a little town stood up to something big." Emma hesitated. She wasn't one for the spotlight, but she knew this was bigger than her. "I'll do it," she said finally. "If it helps more people, I'll do it." Victor sat in a holding cell at the sheriff's station, his once commanding presence diminished but not entirely gone. Sheriff Morris entered, carrying a clipboard and a cup of coffee. "You've got a decision to make," Morris said, placing the coffee on the table. "Testify against the network, and you'll get leniency. Refuse, and you'll spend the rest of your life behind bars." Victor stared at the coffee for a long moment before speaking. "What's the point? I've already lost everything." "That's not true," Morris said. "You still have a chance to do some good, to help fix the damage you've done." Victor scoffed but didn't argue. Deep down, he knew Morris was right. After a long silence, he nodded. "Fine, I'll testify, but not for leniency. For them." He gestured toward the window, where he could see townspeople working together to rebuild. Green Haven's transformation didn't end with the Iron Fang's defeat. It grew stronger each day as the community banded together. The Green Haven Veterans Initiative expanded to include counseling, job training, and youth mentorship programs. Former gang members like Reese became mentors, using their experiences to guide others away from the path they had taken. Marcy's Diner became the heart of the town's recovery, hosting weekly community dinners where everyone, regardless of their past, was welcome. Even Jake, who had once been reluctant to believe in change, became a vocal supporter of the initiative. "We're not just fixing buildings," Jake said during one of these dinners. "We're fixing what was broken inside us." News of Green Haven's success spread far and wide. Reporters visited the town to document the story of its transformation. Other towns dealing with similar problems reached out, eager to learn from Green Haven's example. Emma found herself busier than ever, coordinating with Luke and other leaders to share their methods. She gave interviews, led training sessions, and even helped set up programs in neighboring towns. One afternoon, as she stood on the steps of the community center, she received a call from a town halfway across the country. The mayor had read about Greenhaven and wanted advice on how to start a similar initiative. "We were where you are now," Emma told him. "It's not easy, and it doesn't happen overnight. But if you can bring people together and show them what's possible, change will come." 6 months later, Greenhaven held a celebration in the town square. The event honored the progress they had made and the resilience of their community. Emma stood at the edge of the crowd, watching as townspeople laughed, danced, and shared stories. Reese approached, holding a cup of lemonade. "Not bad for a town that was ready to give up." Emma smiled. "Not bad at all." As the festivities continued, a group of children unveiled a mural on the side of the community center. It depicted the town's journey, a broken street transforming into a thriving community with people standing together against the shadows. Victor's figure was included in the mural, his face softened with regret but also with hope. It was a reminder that even the darkest paths could lead to redemption. Later that evening, Emma sat with Luke and Marcy outside the diner, watching the sun set over the town. The streets were quiet, but not the heavy silence of fear. It was the peaceful stillness of a town that had found its strength. "You did it," Marcy said, raising her coffee mug in a toast. "We did it," Emma corrected, smiling. As the first stars appeared in the sky, Emma felt a deep sense of peace. Greenhaven wasn't perfect, but it was whole, and that was worth everything. In the days to come, the story of Greenhaven would inspire countless others. It wasn't just a story about standing up to a gang. It was a story about standing together, about choosing hope over fear, and about the power of redemption. And in the heart of Greenhaven, at a table in Marcy's diner, that story would live on, told and retold over coffee, laughter, and the quiet courage of a town that refused to give up.